Hello, all you amazing women, and welcome to How to Feel Like a Midlife Goddess. With me, Amanda Ryder, nutritionist and author. Now, I call this podcast How to Feel Like a Midlife Goddess because, let's face it, so many of us don't feel like shining in midlife. We can be grappling with physical and psychological symptoms, which can lead to a real loss of confidence, and it can feel like you're really losing your identity. However, I believe it's possible for us all to feel good at this time of our lives. So each week, I'm going to be sharing with you my best nutrition and lifestyle advice, as well as interviewing expert speakers. And week by week, together, we will build upon a foundation of healthy, sustainable habits that will really benefit us and make all the difference to how we feel. So stay tuned, because this is your recipe for thriving at midlife and bringing out your inner goddess. Hello, hi, and welcome to episode 11. Gosh, I can't believe we've done 11 episodes already, and actually feeling quite proud of myself for getting this far. And also want to say thank you to you guys, because I really do appreciate your texts and emails and want you to know that your positive messages really keep me going. So today it is just you and me, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk about losing weight, maintaining weight, and staying strong, because this is a course that I've been running recently. So my head is really thinking around weight loss and maintaining strength and how to be our best selves in our 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, etc. And I'm just going to be sharing with you some of the advice that I share on my online programs. I've been running these online programs now for the last year, and I have a different group every couple of months, and I work with between 5 and 10 women and coach them over 6 weeks. And I thought it would be a really lovely opportunity to share my sort of top tips about what might help you in maintaining or even losing some weight if you need to. And also I just wanted to think a little bit about the whole mechanism of why we gain weight. I think if you have a really good understanding, it's really helpful when you're in the process of losing weight and keeping it off if you understand why it goes on and what's happening within the body. You know, it's also quite interesting, I was thinking, that I always start my online course, like week 1, I start by saying that if you can get control over your appetite, then you can be in control. You can be in control of what you put in your mouth. But if you can't get control of your appetite, it's so difficult, impossible to lose some weight or to be healthy and stay strong. And if we think of the new weight loss drugs, you know, Ozempic and Wegovy, which is this class of semaglutides that help suppress appetite and have been incredibly efficacious in helping people lose weight. That's exactly what they're doing. They are helping you to switch off your appetite. But really, if you're like me, we want to do it naturally. We don't want to take a medication. And I'm not saying those medications don't have their place, because I'm sure they are going to be super helpful for people that are obese. But like all these things, lots of people will be taking them that are not obese and are already taking them. And these drugs are out there and they are prolific. And as soon as you stop taking the drug, within a year, you've regained 70% of the weight. That's what the data is showing. So, you know, you are on it for life if you do go down that route. It would be kind of nice if it just sort of reset you, wouldn't it? You could just take it for a year, change your eating habits to be more healthy, have more control over what you put in your mouth. But sadly, that doesn't seem to be the case with this class of drugs. But I think for most of us, we don't want to go down that route. And if you've listened to my episode, how I lost 60 kilos in less than 2 years with Carenza, you'll know that it is absolutely possible, even when you have a lot of weight to lose. But anyway, enough of those drugs. Let's talk about how we can control our appetite naturally and what we can do if we need to lose a little bit of weight, or if we just want to maintain our weight, when you probably know that in midlife it just goes on without making any changes whatsoever. So why does that happen? Well, it happens because as we get into midlife, we have lower levels of estrogen. As our ovaries stop producing eggs, we stop producing as much estrogen. And I read this the other day and I was kind of flabbergasted, but did you know that once you kind of have gone through perimenopause and you're postmenopausal, i.e. you haven't had periods for 12 months, your estrogen levels drop to 2 to 5% of what they originally were. That is massive, isn't it? It's like no wonder we feel so different when we've got these very low levels of estrogen. Anyway, this lower level of estrogen means that we are less insulin sensitive. And, you want to be insulin sensitive. Basically, if you're less insulin sensitive, you're not going to be managing your blood sugar as well, because insulin is the hormone that takes the glucose out of your bloodstream and places it into your cells. And if that's not happening efficiently, it stays in your bloodstream for longer. And, you're kind of getting this message to store fat, store fat, store fat, which we want to switch off. So then the brain doesn't get the message that we're full. So we keep wanting to eat. And also there's another hormone called leptin, and that is the hormone that tells the brain that we are full. And that message gets blocked. So we're just constantly on this treadmill of eating and then being hungry 90 minutes later, eating and being hungry like 90 minutes later. So not only are you sort of gaining weight, even though you haven't changed anything to your diet or lifestyle, you're feeling hungrier as well. And you're kind of looking for that dopamine hit. So you keep wanting those really sort of carby foods that are going to give you some blood glucose. And we know now that diets are not about calories in and calories out, even though that makes such a lot of sense, doesn't it? You put the energy in and then you do lots of exercise and the energy goes out. We just know that is not the whole picture when it comes to weight loss. And, you know this yourself, if you've gained any weight in midlife, that you haven't changed anything, but yet you've gained weight. And if you think about hormones, it's a very simple way of thinking about it. But if you think about how hormones control how we lay down fat, you've only got to think about men and women in puberty. We might eat the same calories as our male counterparts, yet, we grow breasts and wider hips and, they grow more muscle. And that is the power of hormones, what they tell your body to do. So really, it's more about where your body decides to store the fat and the message that you're giving. Thinking about that a bit more, why are we not feeling full? Why are we not receiving that message? And like I said, it can be because we're just not getting the leptin message to our brain that we are full. And then we keep grazing and we keep getting these blood sugar spikes because we're hungry all the time and we're looking for that dopamine here. And we're finding it hard to resist sweet, carby foods. So that constant blood sugar spiking, we get that insulin spike and that message to store fat. And then another thing that can happen in midlife is we don't sleep so well. I see this a lot with, in my clinic, that people will explain to me that they just start, they can get off to sleep okay, but they wake up at like 3 or 4, which is classic kind of perimenopause, menopause symptom, that waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning and then your mind kind of whirring away and finding it harder to get back to sleep. And then if you ever think about those days or those nights when you haven't slept very well, the next day it's almost impossible to get on top of your appetite. You are constantly hungry the whole day. And no matter what you eat, you just can't seem to satiate yourself. And that's because when we don't sleep as well, we make another hormone called ghrelin. And ghrelin's the hormone that's being produced when our stomach rumbles and we sort of feel those strong hunger pangs. And we make more ghrelin when we don't sleep well. Another reason why we gain weight is because we might feel more stressed. And when we're more stressed, we produce more cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And, cortisol is good. We need it in the morning to get us up and get us ready for the day. And then it kind of drops off, throughout the day. And, it's nice and low by the time we go to bed. However, if we're constantly stressed and we keep pulling on that cortisol, then that whole mechanism doesn't happen as well. And when cortisol is high, it's telling your body to run away from danger or to fight. It's setting you up so that you're in prime position to protect yourself and survive. But of course, often our stress these days doesn't come from a saber-toothed tiger or imminent danger. It comes because it's just chronic stress and it's in our environment, it's in our, emails, it's, with our work colleagues or our to-do list, whatever it might be. And you may have noticed that in midlife, I certainly did, that I didn't cope with stress as well as I used to, and I can be overwhelmed. And again, I'm talking from personal experience, but I hear this from a lot of women that, you just can get that stress response a lot quicker than you did a few years ago. So it's really important that we do think about how we mitigate stress, because again, as estrogen drops off, our stress levels can go up, or we just don't cope with stress quite as well. And then another reason is that, having a lack of muscle. Now, if you've read my book, or, you follow me anywhere, or you've seen my talks, you know that I always talk about muscle being your engine. And unfortunately, it's a bit depressing, but from the age of 30, we start losing muscle mass. So it's really important that we work on that in midlife, and that we do our strength training exercises, and that we eat adequate protein to protect our muscles, because our muscles are our engine. And if we have a large muscle, we burn more calories at rest. And if we have a small amount of muscle, we don't burn as many calories. And I always talk about, the Ferrari and the Fiat 500. If you drive to the shop in a Ferrari 500, in a Ferrari, you're going to burn a lot more calories than if you drive to the shop in a Fiat 500. So we want to be the Ferrari with lots of muscle. And then also, if you are thinking you want to try and lose a bit of weight, I always say to women that I work with, don't just rely on your bathroom scales that give you your overall weight number in kilos or stones or whichever measurement you use, but also measure your waist, your hips and your thighs, so that each week when perhaps you repeat that test and you measure yourself, you can see if you're actually, shrinking a bit and if you're burning fat mass. So don't just rely on the scales, because if your body composition is changing and you lose muscle and fat, sometimes you can look on the scales and not much is changing, and maybe you've changed up your diet, you're eating a bit more protein, you're working out a bit more, so you've gained a bit more muscle, and sort of the number on your scales might look the same and you think, oh, I haven't lost any weight. It can be really disappointing. However, if you measure as well, you can see that, you can see where you are losing weight. So don't rely on that scale, because muscle is heavier than fat. And also, one thing to say here is that when you lose weight, it's absolutely normal to lose a bit of muscle mass. And it's unfortunate, because you don't want to lose muscle mass, do you? You want that engine to remain as big as it possibly can. But it is normal to lose a little bit of muscle mass when you lose weight. And actually, I was listening to a podcast and listening to an expert talking about Ozempic, these weight loss drugs. And people that take those drugs do lose quite a bit of muscle mass, which, probably isn't so bad if you had quite a lot to start with. But if you don't have a lot to start with, obviously that can be a real problem going forward. So clearly, we need to change our approach as we get into midlife, because as I said, things aren't just happening as easy as they once did, or as easily as they once did. So we need to be more savvy about our diet. We need to think about balancing our blood sugar, eating more foods that are natural rather than the, ultra processed kind. We need to think about mitigating our stress, and we need to think about how we can hang on to our muscle mass. So I'm still talking a little bit about understanding weight loss, because I think it's really important. And I did touch on earlier about calories in and calories out. And I still see a lot of people that really think that if they, reduce their calories to like 1,200, that's where the holy grail is and they're going to lose lots of weight. But if you've ever seen anyone do that long term, they can do it for a few months, and then, this control over your appetite comes back. They can't be that disciplined forever. And that kind of appetite comes back and they really want to eat, and they eat the same amount of calories that were eating pre the 1,200 calorie diet, and suddenly they gain all the weight back and some more. And that happens because as you restrict your calories, you basically, if you equate it to like losing some income, say you lose 30% of your income and suddenly you're having to manage on 70% of your income. Well, it's a bit like that with, if you restrict your calories. And what happens is, if you think about it as a sort of income, initially, you overspend, and that's what the body does. It overspends. It keeps using the same amount of calories, even though the same amount of calories aren't coming in. And if we equate that again to an income, initially you lose that 30% of your income. In the beginning, you might carry on buying clothes, going to the theatre, the cinema, eating out. And then after a couple of months, you realise that you're overdrawn and you think, okay, I have to adjust my way of life and live within my means. And your body kind of does a similar thing. It adapts. So initially, your body goes into overdraft and it burns some fat and you lose some weight. But over time, it just slows everything down because it can't stay like that. Because if you kept losing weight at that rate, eventually there'd be nothing left of you. And the body's cleverer than that, and it has to slow things down. So everything works a lot slower, whether it's your kidney or your liver, your heart, everything has to slow down to live within the means of this, reduced amount of calories. And obviously you don't want to do that because, you don't want to slow everything down. You want to be feeling well and energized. And who wants to live on a diet of 1,200 calories? Not much fun at all. But hopefully you now understand why calories in, calories out isn't the whole picture. However, and I'm going to talk a little bit about intermittent fasting. When you fast, so you have these periods of time where you don't eat, that activates your sympathetic nervous system. And what that does, it stimulates human growth hormone and adrenaline. What they do is they tell your body to start burning fat. And that can be where the beauty of fasting comes in for weight loss. So to put that another way, this human growth hormone and adrenaline that your body then starts producing is basically telling your body to burn fat for energy. So that is really what you want to do. If you want to lose a bit of weight, you want to start burning fat. And that's why fasting can be so effective. So how do we get control of our insulin? I talked about blood sugar balancing. We want to avoid the peaks and the troughs. And again, this is, nutrition 101. If you don't balance your blood sugar, you can't have that control over your appetite. So if you eat very carbohydrate-rich meals or lots of sugary biscuits and cakes, your blood sugar rushes up, your insulin rushes up with it. Your insulin's really high, it's telling your body to store fat, and then it dips really quickly and you're suddenly in a trough. And then after about 90 minutes, you're really, really hungry again. And you just end up on this roller coaster all day long. Not where you want to be. It doesn't feel good to have a blood sugar that is racing up and down like a roller coaster, because with the highs come the lows, and with the lows you can feel jittery, tired, irritable, hungry. It doesn't make you feel good. Whereas if you can avoid those highs and lows and just have nice undulating curves, you feel satiated and you also feel quite calm and together. And, that for me is why I love balancing my own blood sugar, because I feel so much better. So balancing your blood sugar is key. And getting more sensitive to insulin. So insulin, the cells pick up insulin really quickly, and your body knows to open the doors to let the glucose into the cells, and that you don't have high insulin levels for long periods of time, which are going to keep driving your appetite and driving your fat accumulation. And as I said earlier, in midlife, the fat doesn't go anywhere. It seems to go round the middle. And it's almost like if you eat sweet foods, you can almost see it around your middle within days. And then, of course, we also want to make our brain more sensitive to the hormone that I mentioned earlier called leptin, and that is the satiety hormone. So let me explain how you can do just that. Now, in my book, I always talk about the Feel Good 4, and if you want to listen to a podcast about the Feel Good 4, and that is protein, complex carbohydrates, also known as good carbs, fats, and greens, then episode 1 of this podcast will go into that in some depth. But for today's purpose, I'm just going to talk about the overall picture of balancing our blood sugar. Now, like I said, we want to avoid those peaks. We want to avoid that message to store fat that we get when the insulin is high. Now, we can do this by eating our foods in order. Now, did you know that if you eat a green salad before your meal, it slows down that blood sugar peak? And that's because the sort of vegetables or the salad, it kind of gets into your digestion, into your stomach and your small intestines, and it just slows everything down. So it's such an easy habit to get into. So even if you just take one thing from this podcast, have a green salad before, your lunch and your dinner, and that that's going to help you have better blood sugar control. If you have like a bowl of spaghetti, but you have a rocket salad beforehand, you can see with people that when they're wearing like a continued glucose monitor, which is just like one of these little devices that you stick on your arm and then you sync it with your app or an app, and you can see what your blood sugar is doing in real time. You can see that if you have the salad first and then the carbs, like some spaghetti afterwards, you don't get such a spike. Same if you have broccoli beforehand, or if you have pineapple on its own, then you kind of get this spike of blood sugar. But if you have pineapple or fruit at the end of the meal, you don't get such a spike. So just having a green salad, keeping it really, really simple, before a meal is such a brilliant thing to do. Another thing you can do is try and eat in order. And, this can be a bit boring, but if you just think, well, I'm going to do my best and maybe the first few mouthfuls of my food will be, vegetables or salad. So say you've got your vegetables, your protein, your fat and your carbohydrates on your plate. Start by having, a few mouthfuls of vegetables and then a few mouthfuls of protein and then your fat and then, maybe you eat it all together at the same time, but try and have the carbohydrates last. Now, if you've listened to my episode on why Japanese women don't suffer with menopause, and just makes me think about their diet, but their way of eating, they'll have, 3 or 4 or 5 bowls of like miso soup, a little bit of rice, some fish, some vegetables, and they kind of eat a little bit from all of the bowls. But they tend to sort of eat the rice towards the end of the meal. And, I think that just stops them having that spike. And if we think about the obesity rate in Japan, which is about 4%, and we compare that to the obesity rate in the United Kingdom, which I think off the top of my head is 26%, you can see why all of this makes so much sense. Another really easy win when it comes to balancing your blood sugar is having a savoury breakfast. Something like eggs or fish, because that just seems to set you up for the day. If you have a savoury breakfast that includes sort of, 20, 25 grams of protein, even if you go off piece during the day, it seems to calm down your blood sugar and your body seems to have better control over your blood sugar throughout the day, and you tend to avoid the peaks and troughs. Whereas if you have quite a carbohydrate-rich breakfast, that does not happen so well. So yeah, try and experiment with having a savoury breakfast. Now, I always talk about protein, and you probably get that from any nutritionist or dietitian or health expert that you listen to. But the reason we talk about having adequate amounts of protein in midlife is you need it. It's the building blocks for so many things, but specifically muscle. We don't want to lose that muscle. Remember, from the age of 30, we start losing muscle mass. It also helps us with the blood sugar balancing because protein is thermogenic, meaning when we are digesting protein and metabolizing it, we create heat. And that basically means we're using energy, we're burning calories to actually even just process protein, which doesn't happen with carbohydrates and fats. And it also turns off hunger hormones in the body. So we know that eating adequate amounts of protein is going to help you get control of your appetite, which is where we started at. That is where the magic comes, getting control of your appetite. So let's talk a little bit about timings, when you eat. And I often say this to people, when you eat is almost as important as what you eat. Now, in my book, I talk about the hybrid diet. But today, just to get you started, this intermittent fasting just means having periods in your day where you don't eat. So a really popular intermittent fasting method is the 16-8 diet. And that just means you eat in an 8-hour window and you have 16 hours where you don't eat. And you might think, oh my goodness, 16 hours, that's such a long time. But of course, a lot of the time, that time you're going to be asleep. If you do something like having a late breakfast and having a dinner, is very easy to eat within that 8-hour window. Now, I personally do a hybrid diet where I do the 16-8 for 3 or 4 days a week. And on the days when I'm working out, I will have 3 meals a day and I'll probably have more of a sort of 13, 14 hour fast. But I always say to people, see what works for you. Some people don't enjoy the 16-8. They feel they need breakfast to get them going. And I would say, you know your body better than anybody else does. But at the same time, if you don't experiment, you never know. And when you do experiment, you do kind of have to give it, a week or 2 to see if your body adapts to a new way of eating. So the hybrid diet can be really good. Maybe try having lunch and dinner for 3 or 4 days of the week and then going to 3 meals a day for the other days and just see how that works out. But I would say to anybody, you really want to have as a minimum a 12-hour fast overnight. So if you finish your dinner at 7, you do not want to be having your breakfast until 7 the next day. And if you can push that to 9, so you're getting a 14-hour fast, even better. So for me personally, what I do is I get up in the morning and I take the dog out first, and, I have breakfast when I come back, or I have brunch a few hours later if I'm doing the 16-8 and I'm eating in that 8-hour window. But do, like I said, just try at the very bare minimum to have a 12-hour fast, because what happens is you give your body a rest overnight, really good for your gut and really good for burning fat. And if you're eating, at 9, 10 o'clock at night, we know that those calories that you eat at that time of day, they don't get burnt in the same way as the calories that you eat earlier in the day. So ideally, you really want to be having like 3 to 4 hours of not eating before you go to bed. Now, I must admit, I really struggled with this. I find it easier to not eat so much during the day, and then at night when I'm all relaxed and I finish my work, I feel I can have my dinner, and then, maybe if my husband and I sit down and watch some TV, it's kind of nice to have some chocolate or some biscuits or, something sweet. And it took me a while to think, no, there is no way you can do this and be healthy and get this 12, 14-hour fast. So I've stopped doing that now. So I have some strict rules around when my kitchen closes. And that's kind of a really good way of thinking about it. So I always say to myself, after my meal, at the absolute latest, if I'm at home, I stop eating after 8. So my kitchen closes at 8 p.m. and I don't eat after then. And sometimes I really feel like eating after 8 o'clock. And if I'm out for dinner, it's a different scenario, but I'm not out for dinner every night, so it doesn't matter. It's what I'm doing most of the time that makes the biggest difference. But I will just, instead have some herbal tea. And in the beginning, it was really hard, but now I've just got into the habit. I don't snack after dinner because I know those calories are going to affect my blood sugar. And if you wear a glucose monitor, as I was mentioning earlier, and you're seeing your blood sugar, what happens is the next morning, after you've been eating calories, maybe at 8, 9, 10 o'clock, the next morning your blood sugar is really high. It's not a good thing. It really affects your blood sugar for the next 12, 24 hours. So again, try and have that rule around when your kitchen closes. Some people I speak to don't have that problem. They literally stop eating at 6 p.m. and they're fine with that. And other people do. And I was in the other category. But I just kept working on that. And, I always think when I'm struggling with something, I say to myself, come on, Amanda, this is your growth mindset. You've got to get into this. And that, just saying that to myself, and growth mindset is that belief that with time and effort, you can change things and you can improve yourself. And that's why, I've done it, because I want to be as healthy as I possibly can. So yeah, I just remind myself when it's a little bit tough, I'm working on my growth mindset, and I'll have my cup of chamomile or peppermint tea instead. And of course now I've been doing that for such a long time that it's so much easier. So I always coach people, stop eating after 7, 8 o'clock latest. And then maybe you say to yourself, you're only going to have 2 to 3 meals a day. And if you can, try and have 4 to 5 hour gaps in between meals, because that just gives your body a rest and it helps your blood glucose levels. We are not designed to be grazing all day long and our blood sugar to be going up and down like a yo-yo. We are not cows. We don't need that. We just need to eat 3 or 2 really good meals, that are really nutrient rich 2 to 3 times a day. Now, we want to improve our internal communications. So, we want to get leptin sensitive. Now, I touched on that earlier. That is the hormone that tells your brain that you are full. And this is one of the reasons that when you're overweight or obese, it's so much harder to lose weight, because you don't get that message very loudly, whereas slimmer people do. And so, I'm not saying it's hard losing weight. It definitely is. So, we want to avoid it going on and we want to get on top of it as soon as we can. But, nothing is impossible, and it can be done through diet. And you can remain toned and strong in your midlife, even when all these things don't happen quite as automatically. But we want to get leptin sensitive. And one of the reasons that we can become insensitive to leptin is that we have too many omega-6s, these long-chain fatty acids that we get from seed oils, in comparison to our omega-3s, which we get from oily fish and nuts. So we really want to think about that. Now, in the Western diet, we tend to get a lot of fats from seed oils like sunflower oil. Most of the restaurants will use sunflower oil in their cooking, and you think about crisps and all the processed foods. If you look at them, they're generally using these seed oils, which are quite new to the human diet. But what studies have shown that when we have higher levels of these omega-6s, which come from the seed oils, in ratio to our omega-3s, which come from oily fish, that can block this message to our brain that we are full. And it's one of the reasons that we don't get the leptin sensitivity that we need. So I would say try and stay off the processed foods where these seed oils come in, and try and get more oily fish into your diet, or flax seeds and nuts. Like walnuts can be really helpful, and that will help benefit the ratio of omega-3s to 6s and get them in a better balance. So, just by eating, more natural foods and cooking at home, that just happens automatically. That oil change, if you like, can take up to a year. So it's, like all these things, Rome wasn't built in a day. You have to just keep working at it, get into that growth mindset, and consistency is key, and just keep making progress. But do try and get those processed foods out of your diet. And I know it's hard when we're all busy, but just work on it and stop having the finger foods in your kitchen, like biscuits and crisps, which you can pick things up with your hands and eat. If you're going to have those, make yourself at least walk to the shop and buy them. Don't get them with your standard groceries. You really want to keep those to a minimum and get that leptin message loud and clear to your brain. So I also just wanted to mention here and go back to stress, because we talked about stress and how that can peak your cortisol, before I move on to more food related advice. But do try and mitigate your stress. It's impossible, isn't it, to not have any stress? I mean, if you want to achieve things in life and you're busy, and it's great having purpose and getting things done, isn't it? But think about how you can mitigate stress in terms of meditation, journaling, walking with your dog, connecting with friends, getting outside in nature, maybe not drinking as much coffee. That can also, make you a bit more stressed. Avoiding those situations where you do get stressed as much as you possibly can. And just having a bit of what I call me, myself time, which can be really good for calming the nervous system. But I won't say much more about stress because that's a whole other topic. But it is part of the weight loss and staying strong and not gaining weight picture, if you like. So anyway, back to food. So these are kind of my blood sugar key takeaways. So you want that fast overnight, at least 12 hours. If you can, and to some degree, we want to eat in order. So we eat our vegetables first, then our protein, then our fats, and then our carbohydrates. We want to have sweet foods at the end of a meal. So if you enjoy fruit or chocolate or a dessert, have it at the end of a meal rather than at the beginning. Because remember, the protein is taking longer to digest and it's slowing everything down along with the vegetables. So you won't get so much of a peak. Whereas if you have fruit in between meals or you have chocolate in between meals, you tend to get that spike or that croissant or muffin or whatever. I also talked about having a savoury breakfast and trying to get that 20-25 grams of protein. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how you can achieve that in a minute. Another thing I didn't say was, did you know that even walking after meals for 10 minutes can have such a beneficial impact on your blood sugar? Because it helps the glucose in your bloodstream get into your muscles. So walking after a meal can be really beneficial. And if you can, drag yourself out after your evening meal, brilliant. If you've got a dog, take it around the block. But if not, go up and down the stairs, start putting some, washing away, or just doing something. Just time it 10-15 minutes before you actually sit down and start relaxing, knowing that is also going to be a bit of a win for your blood sugar. And think about your gaps in between meals. If you can do 4 or 5 hours, amazing. And work on your muscle mass, because that bigger engine also means that when you do eat more calories and you eat more carbohydrates or foods containing glucose, the muscles suck it in. And, sometimes you can look at slim people and you think, where are they putting all those calories? They've got a bigger depot. They've got more muscle mass, and the muscle takes in that glucose, so they don't end up with a spike. And if you don't have that spike in glucose and that spike in insulin, you're not getting that message to store fat, store fat, store fat, which is what we want to switch off. So this brings me back to the feel good 4. Touched on it earlier. Protein, fats, greens, and complex carbs is kind of what we want to get on our plate most of the time. And, when I talk about protein, I'm talking about salmon and chicken fillets, red meat occasionally, eggs, cottage cheese. You can get protein from legumes like chickpeas and beans and peas even, and quinoa, yogurt, cheese. These all foods contain protein. So you really want to get good at ensuring you get enough protein. So how much is enough protein for you? Well, I work on approximately 1.1 grams of protein per kilograms of body weight. So if we think about the average woman in the United Kingdom, we're about 11.2 stones. So that's 72 kilos. So we basically, 72 kilos times by 1.1 grams equals 79.2 grams of protein per day. So if you divide that over 3 meals a day, we're looking at about 26.4 grams per meal. And if we were dividing that just between 2 meals, we'd be looking for sort of just under 40 grams of protein per meal. So it sounds like quite a lot, but you get protein not just from the sort of animal-based foods, but it's in everything, but to some degree. So it's kind of mix and match can be really useful. But here are some sort of simple ways of getting at 25 grams. And of course, this does very much depend. Some people will say, you need 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And some people will say you only need 1. It's very much an individual thing. Dr. Gabrielle Lyons, she talks about having, I think it's 1.5 or 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And that is a lot. I can't achieve that. I'd just be eating all day long. I wouldn't feel comfortable on that. And I go back to that message. You know yourself better than anybody else. So try these things out and see how it sits with you. Do you feel full? Do you feel sated when you have this amount of protein? Or do you feel like you get a stomachache and you can't possibly break down that much protein? Listen to your body. We're all different shapes and sizes. And some people need more, some people need less. But I think 1.1 grams is a good place to start. So you can achieve this sort of, say, 25 grams with each meal by having a 3-egg omelette with about 50 grams of smoked salmon. You could have a smoothie for breakfast. And you could use some protein powder or some tofu in that smoothie. And that would get you up to, easily you could add 25 grams into your smoothie with a couple of spoonfuls of the protein powder or half a block of tofu. 100 grams of a chicken breast will give you roughly 25 grams of protein. 200 grams of lentils and an egg and some smoked salmon will also help you achieve that. A big fillet of white fish, 130 grams, something like that, will give you 25 grams of protein. You could use tofu. Like I said, it's usually about half a block. You can use that in stir fries and curries. It's a really good food. Our Japanese counterparts eat a lot of that and they don't suffer so much with menopause. Also, I really enjoy porridge and I like steel cut oats, and these are like the original oats. They haven't been processed at all. They contain a lot more fibre, and I like a couple of steel cut oats, and I'll have some kefir and some nuts and some Greek yogurt with that. Sometimes I'll even stir in a couple of teaspoons of collagen powder, and I know that brings the level of protein up, and then I'm not getting that blood sugar rush and that blood sugar fall that I'd get if I just had a bowl of rolled oats. So I still enjoy porridge that way, and that gets me about 25 grams of protein. 100 grams of wild Alaskan salmon will help you achieve that, 25 grams per meal. And then just think about nuts and seeds and cheese and yogurt and try and mix and match. And if you really want to be very sure about how much you're having, you could always use an app that will measure your protein. And I wouldn't recommend like measuring your macronutrients all the time. It's so boring. Who wants to be obsessed with food in that way? But it can be quite useful for a week when you can see that, you're really not getting enough protein in your diet, or you're getting too much protein or too many fats or whatever. It can just be useful for helping you to see where you are, because it can be quite surprising when you actually do that. And MyFitnessPal, I think they give you like a free month or something. So you could just sign up for that and just experiment for a week or two and see where you're already at and where you need to improve. But just remember that this protein is going to help curb your cravings. It's going to help you go longer between meals. It's going to help you feel physically stronger. Now, the women that I work with, they notice, and they tell me when they come back that they feel that the quality of their skin and their hair and their nails has all improved, and the growth is happening that little bit faster when they have adequate amount of protein. And I often see with women that we're not so good at protein as men. I don't know, they just seem to have higher levels of it in their diet. I find with myself and with women that I work with that we naturally gravitate towards more carbohydrate rich meals, whereas men just tend to go for that protein in those steaks and, fillets, etc. So if that's you, you just need to be a little bit more mindful and get a little bit more protein in your diet if necessary. But like I said, lots of benefits to doing that. And you don't need to become obsessed with it. Even things like, if you're having like a lentil soup, just having maybe some mackerel pate with it, or some sardines, or some crab I quite like, or a bit of cheese. And you just kind of, you're just upping the protein because you're getting some protein from the lentils, but you're also adding a bit on. So just little things like that can really just help increase the amount of protein that you're getting in your diet. And then you can have all the benefits that we have talked about. So that's kind of adequate protein covered. And really, I wanted to talk about fats a little bit. And this is one of, I talk about the Feel Good 4, and this is like the second component, the sort of second macronutrient. And just wanted to say, that fats don't make you fat. We need fats to make hormones. Without fats, we can't synthesize hormones. So, we need them for that. Fats are filling. They help curb our cravings. Fats turn off hunger hormones. We produce this hormone in the gut called cholecystokinin, CCK, and that suppresses our appetite and helps us to feel calm and happy. And, who doesn't want that? And then also, bear in mind that fats help us absorb fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin A, vitamin D, E, and K, all essential for good health. We need our essential fats, our omega-3 fatty acids for our joint health and our skin, and those right kind of fats dampen the inflammation in our body. And we want, an anti-inflammatory diet at this stage in our lives. So just as you get older, inflammation does increase. And fats are also necessary for a healthy brain and a nervous system. So don't shun fats. And really, I think fats to focus on are things like, oily fish, avocado, nuts and seeds, olives, eggs, extra virgin olive oil. I always have probably 3 tablespoons easily a day over the course of the day. Lots of benefits to having extra virgin olive oil in your diet. Grass-fed meats, lamb, steak, chia and flax seeds. And those kind of grass-fed meats tend to have a much better fatty acid profile rather than sort of heavily farmed. We also want to get good at carbohydrates, and that's the sort of third macronutrient. And when I say getting good at carbs, we want to focus on complex carbohydrates. So we want to ditch the simple and embrace the complex. And complex are just those ones that have more fibre in them. And the simples are the ones that have less fibre in them. So like bread and pasta and biscuits and cakes, those things, the body can turn the carbohydrates into glucose into your bloodstream very quickly. And then you end up with that peak in blood sugar. So, what are complex carbohydrates? Well, just quickly, they're vegetables, beans, chickpeas, lentils, potatoes. There's nothing wrong with a humble potato, especially if you get organic, with the skins on, scrub them a little bit, chop them up, a little bit of olive oil in the oven, and you've got lovely sort of what I call homemade chips, more like sort of potato wedges. But, a few humble potatoes are good in my opinion. Root vegetables, anything that grows under the ground will have more carbohydrate in it. Buckwheat's a nice grain to include. I like rice as well. I go for basmati and brown. I always opt for organic where possible. And I don't have a massive portion of rice. I do like the Japanese do. I have a small amount and I just really enjoy it. And then fruits also are a good carbohydrate, but I would have them at the end of a meal. If you have them between meals, what happens is they generally spike your blood sugar a little, and we're trying to avoid that. Whereas if you have them at the end of a meal, like the Mediterraneans do, they don't have a fast pass through your digestion, so they can't raise your blood sugar that quickly. They just go along merrily with the proteins and the fats, and, it's all good. So yeah, fruits, 3 pieces a day is adequate for most people. And then the fourth macronutrient I talk about in my Feel Good 4 is greens. And greens are good for so many reasons. Having a green salad is a great way to get on top of your blood sugar and how much you eat. Greens in a smoothie can be really good. You can just throw in a handful of spinach into your smoothie. You can saute some greens. One of my favourite ways is to saute some garlic and maybe some spring onions if I've got them in a little bit of olive oil, and then I'll start adding in some broccoli and some peas and maybe some fennel, whatever I've got in basically, and just put a lid on my pan and let it saute for 5 minutes, and you end up with these really lovely tasty greens. And I might save some and have them for the next day. I always have a green drawer in my fridge, so I've got things like rocket and watercress that I can just pull out very easily as a base for my salad. And pre-steamed greens are really good as well. So if I've steamed some broccoli, I'll generally do twice as much as I need and save some for the next day. Oh, and I also like to maybe just stir some greens into a soup. That's another lovely way of increasing the amount of greens that you have in your diet. So I think that's covered some of the practical aspects of losing weight or maintaining your weight in midlife. But I just want to touch on the area of self-sabotage, which I always talk to the ladies that are in my groups, because a lot of us suffer with this, don't we? Our sort of belief systems around what we are capable of. And it is difficult right now to be healthy. And I always say this, if you want to be the healthiest version of yourself, then you have to buck the trend. If you're going to eat like everybody else in the UK, you are much more likely to be overweight. And of course, we do live in an obesogenic society. If you compare, like I said earlier, our rate of obesity, 26%, to Japan's 4%, then it's easy to see, in Japan, it's much harder for them to gain weight. Here, it's so easy for us because, there's so much processed food around. It's quick, it's easy, it's cheap. It's so much easier to gain weight than it is to stay fit and healthy and strong and a weight that you are healthy at. So don't beat yourself up. It's hard. It is really hard. But I want you to think about, you are worth it. And a lot of us have that inner critic, that inner voice that tells us there's no point in trying to lose weight because we're not worth it. And we totally are. We put a lot of energy into other things in our life. We've got to put it into ourselves and focus on, nourishing and looking after ourselves in midlife. Some people have that kind of belief that they can't do it. And I would say you can do it. If you haven't already, have a listen to the podcast I did with Karenza, how I lost 60 kilos in 2 years. Now, she'd been overweight for most of her, in fact, all of her adult life. And she lost that weight when she was 60. So it is possible. It's just, changing that mindset and changing your approach to diet. Also, I hear people say that they feel they're not good enough. They're never able to lose the weight, so why bother? And I just think it's really important to challenge those beliefs and talk to yourself, as if you're your own best friend, because you'd never talk to a friend in a way that you talk to yourself. So just challenge those beliefs and know that it is possible at whatever age to change your diet and, have this system that works in your favor rather than against you when it comes to controlling your appetite. And I've also come across this term called crave surfing. And they've shown that when people, are craving chips or a hot dog or a burger or a couple of muffins, whatever it might be, if you can sit with that craving for 20 to 30 minutes, it does pass. But most of us are programmed to think, oh my goodness, if I'm hungry, I really should eat something. There's some kind of danger. And of course, it's not. If you're hungry, for most of us, that feeling will pass after 20 to 30 minutes. So when I'm working with people and I'm getting them to either follow sort of a 2-meal-a-day approach or a 3-meal-a-day approach, they will be having, 4 to 5 hours in between meals. And that can be alien to some of us. And I find when people first start doing that they get to about 3 hours and they're really, really hungry and they want to chew their arm off. But once they've gone through that, like 20 to 30 minutes, usually the body says, okay, there's no carbs coming. We're just going to have to burn some fat here. And what it does, it just gives your body the notice that you need to burn some fat. And remember, fat is energy. And that might take a little while for you to feel good doing that. But usually it's just 4 to 5 days. People say to me after that period, like those first few days, that they can manage the 4 to 5 hour gaps really easily and they're not as hungry anymore. So know that that's where you're going to get to, and you just have to tough it out for the first, 3 to 4 days. So that's all I'm going to talk about, I think, for this episode. I could go on and on. There's so much to say. And if you're interested in more talk and podcasts around weight maintenance, weight loss, do let me know and I will do my best. But just to cover, what we've been talking about and just have a little summary, this is what I want you to remember. Think about your muscles. They are a sugar sink. The more muscles you have, the more sugar they can take up, the more glucose, the less you're going to have floating around in your bloodstream, causing you to gain weight. And also think about the protein. I think I said enough about protein, but most of us need to give that a little more attention. Think about your order of food. If you can eat your green salad or your protein first, that will be really helpful. Eating natural foods rather than ultra-processed foods that are full of seed oils and other nasty things that we don't really want to have in our diet, like E numbers and emulsifiers. really try not to have the crisps and the biscuits, things that you can eat with your fingers, in your home. And then when you do have them, they're really very occasional. Remember that, if we can have more omega-3s, like from oily fish and nuts and seeds in our diet, and less of sort of seed oils, that can be really beneficial for us. And that we want to have less stress. And whilst, I was talking about stress means that you release cortisol. Cortisol tells your body to release a little bit of your stored glucose into your bloodstream. So you can see why you suddenly end up at the peak. And also stress can block leptin, which is what we don't want, because we want leptin to get to our brain and we get that message that we are full. So think about the Feel Good 4. Have a little think about fasting. Structure your diet. It can be so helpful when you start doing that. The real foods, get those seed oils out and really concentrate on some exercises and getting that protein so that you can really have adequate muscle mass for your body. So I hope that was helpful. And if you need more help, I do run these 6-week online Lose Weight and Stay Strong programs. If you'd like to join one of those, just let me know. Or if you want, like I said, more information on weight loss on this podcast, send me a message. You can actually send a message through the podcast. I think it just says send a text. And I can't reply to those texts, but I do read them all. So don't hesitate to get in touch there or, via the usual channels. Anyway, more in the next couple of weeks and I'll speak to you again soon. And just to say, I really appreciate your company. The podcast is growing, which is brilliant. And if you can, tell your friends about it. If you think it's any good, that would be much appreciated. So thanks for listening, and I hope to have your company next time. Bye. If you'd like to find out more about my approach, you can find me and lots of my simple, nutritious recipes demonstrated on Instagram at Amanda Ryder Nutrition, and that's Ryder with Y. Or you can visit my website, www.amandaryder.co.uk. Or if you like a copy of my book, Feel Good for Menopause, you can find that on Amazon. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate it if you could like, follow, or click the subscribe button. It will really help me grow the podcast and keep me going. So thank you. And of course, do get in touch. I'd always love to hear from you. So that leaves me to say I'm sending lots of love and light from my midlife goddess to yours. See you next week. Bye for now.